Something happened in the first week of January that demanded the world's attention. It was not a speech, nor a sanctions package, nor another carefully managed press conference about democracy or human rights. It was a military operation. In the early hours of January 3rd, U.S. forces struck Venezuelan military infrastructure around Caracas, pushed through the defensive perimeter, and captured Venezuela's sitting president, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife. Within hours, Maduro was out of the country and headed for U.S. custody. Days later, he appeared in a New York courtroom, pleading not guilty, insisting he remained the legitimate president of Venezuela and calling himself a prisoner of war. Almost immediately, the world split into camps. One side said, "Finally, accountability." The other said, "This is abduction, aggression, a dangerous precedent." But neither interpretation captures what is actually at stake. If you see this as America versus Maduro, you miss the real story. Because Maduro is not the story. Venezuela is not even the story. The real story is the U.S. empire adapting its strategy under pressure, as the world order it built becomes more contested. This event is a high-visibility signal, one that reveals how power reorganizes when enforcement becomes more expensive, what the United States is trying to protect, and why the Western Hemisphere is becoming the new enforcement perimeter. To understand what's happening, you need to hold three ideas at once: how the world used to work, how it works now, and how the United States wants it to work. Because that explains why Venezuela has become strategically critical at this moment in history. So let's build the logic carefully. The modern world runs on energy. Every factory, truck, farm, data center, and supply chain depends on it. And for most of the last century, that energy has taken a single dominant form: oil. Affordable, scalable, and globally available, oil became the master input of the modern economy, underpinning food production, transport, industry, and military power. Because energy is the master input, whatever currency is tied to it becomes inseparable from global demand. As energy demand grows, demand for that currency grows with it. This is how oil replaced gold as the anchor of the monetary system. Where banknotes were once redeemable for gold, modern currencies are effectively redeemed for energy. Nations hold money not for its intrinsic value, but because it grants access to the energy required to function. That is where the dollar comes in. By tying global energy trade to dollar settlement, the United States embedded its currency into the foundation of the world economy. Dollar demand became structural, not optional. For a long time, this system required little enforcement. After World War II, Europe was devastated, and the United States held the overwhelming majority of global gold reserves. The dollar did not need to be imposed. It was the only credible option. But the system we live under now is different. As U.S. dominance matured, it was codified. Financial, legal, political, educational, and military institutions normalized dollar settlement across trade, finance, and energy, even after gold convertibility ended in 1971. By then, convertibility was unnecessary. The system had been engineered so that access to trade, capital, and energy increasingly required compliance with dollar-based infrastructure. And where incentives failed, enforcement followed. Institutions such as the IMF, World Bank, WTO, NATO, and aligned legal and media systems provided the tools to discipline non-compliant states through sanctions, isolation, restructuring, and, in extreme cases, military force. Countries did not use the dollar because it was backed by gold, but because the architecture of the global system made alternatives prohibitively costly. This brings us to the core mechanism. The dollar system allows the United States to finance itself continuously. As long as the world needs dollars, those dollars are recycled into U.S. treasuries. Those treasuries finance U.S. spending. That spending funds military power, financial liquidity, and enforcement capacity, which then protects the system that sustains dollar demand. Energy demand creates dollar demand. Dollar demand creates reserve holdings. Reserves recycle into treasuries. Treasuries finance enforcement. Enforcement protects the system. That is the loop. This is why Venezuela matters. What unfolded there was not conquest, but coercion, a familiar pattern. Sanctions, financial isolation, and institutional pressure constrained revenue, restricted access to finance, and eroded internal capacity. We have seen this playbook before. Iraq offers the clearest example. In the 1990s, Iraq attempted to regain autonomy within a system designed to constrain it. The sanctions regime that followed mobilized global institutions aligned with U.S. interests, restricting oil exports, banking access, shipping insurance, and international legitimacy. The currency collapsed. Infrastructure degraded. State capacity hollowed out. Then came the Oil for Food program. Presented as humanitarian relief, it allowed Iraq to sell oil, but placed control of the proceeds outside Baghdad. Revenue flows, procurement, and spending were externally administered. The state lost not only money, but sovereignty. This created predictable outcomes. As formal institutions weakened, power consolidated around choke points. Informal networks flourished. Gatekeepers and intermediaries gained influence. Credible estimates later showed billions lost to kickbacks, surcharges, and smuggling. This is not conspiracy. It is what happens when revenue is externally managed under sanctions. Eventually, Iraq attempted to maneuver, including selling oil in euros rather than dollars. That alone did not cause the invasion, but it marked a breach in the system. When containment fails and realignment does not occur, force becomes the reset function. Venezuela has not crossed that threshold. But the military theater serves the same signaling purpose. Now consider the world as it exists today. The United States remains powerful, but the system it built has become less exclusive. Manufacturing migrated abroad. Debt expanded. Enforcement grew more expensive. At the same time, emerging economies adapted. Asia and the Gulf scaled production, built regional supply chains, and developed alternatives. The result is a fragmented system. Sanctions still punish, but they no longer universally compel. Russia exports energy despite restrictions. Iran routes oil through intermediaries. Venezuela sustains flows through licenses, swaps, and non-Western buyers. The difference from the 1990s is infrastructure. Alternative rails exist. Enforcement is more porous. Military superiority no longer guarantees political outcomes. Afghanistan demonstrated this clearly. Ukraine illustrates it differently. Allies hedge rather than align automatically. This is what multipolarity looks like. Alignment becomes conditional. When a power can no longer enforce everywhere, it consolidates where enforcement is cheapest and most reliable. For the United States, that zone is the Western Hemisphere. Close to home. Shorter logistics. Fewer rival powers. Greater control over energy and settlement. Venezuela is not expansion. It is consolidation. Oil remains the anchor. The dollar system depends on continuous refinancing. Inflation raises rates. Higher rates strain debt rollover. Debt instability threatens confidence. Energy supply is one of the few levers that still matters at scale. Lower energy prices ease inflation. Easier inflation reduces rate pressure. Lower rates stabilize refinancing. This is not ideology. It is system plumbing. That is why U.S. officials want Venezuelan oil flowing, but under U.S. oversight, licensed channels, and observable settlement. The structure mirrors oil for food in strategic shape, if not identical form. You do not need a blockade to control oil. You create risk. Seizure risk. Insurance risk. Banking risk. Trader risk. Markets then self-police. The visibility of Maduro's capture is part of that signal. Not just to Venezuela, but to the region. Guyana, Trinidad, Jamaica, the Bahamas, even Greenland. These are nodes, not narratives. Does this point toward world war? No. Capital moves before headlines. This is not total war. It is managed reordering. So how do other powers actually respond, if total war is off the table? They do not respond symmetrically. They respond structurally. When escalation threatens systemic collapse, rational actors shift away from confrontation and toward insulation. The objective is not to defeat the system head-on, but to reduce exposure to it while continuing to operate inside it where necessary. This is how power behaves in constrained environments. Take China first, because China is the primary background force shaping this era. China's strength does not lie in military projection across the Western Hemisphere. It lies in scale, coordination, and long-term planning. Its strategy is not disruption, but redundancy. Technology is central to that strategy, but technology is energy-intensive. Semiconductor fabrication, AI compute, heavy industry, logistics, and global trade all scale with energy availability. And China is the world's largest energy consumer by a wide margin. That reality defines China's constraint. China cannot afford a sudden rupture in global energy flows, nor can it risk provoking a confrontation that would invite direct interdiction. So instead of challenging enforcement directly, China works around it. It diversifies suppliers. It locks in long-term contracts. It expands overland pipelines that cannot be policed by maritime power. It invests directly in upstream infrastructure rather than spot market exposure. Financially, the same logic applies. China has not declared war on the dollar system. It continues to use dollars where avoidance is costly. But alongside that compliance, it builds insulation. UN-settled trade expands quietly. Bilateral clearing agreements grow incrementally. Alternative payment rails develop in parallel. Barter, offsets, and local currency swaps fill the gaps where visibility matters most. This is not defiance. It is optionality. China may still buy Venezuelan oil, but if that oil is routed through U.S. licensed channels, insured by Western firms, and settled through observable rails, China accepts the trade while conceding the leverage. The barrels move. Control does not. That distinction is the point. Now look at Europe. Europe is structurally constrained in a different way. It lacks energy independence, military autonomy, and financial sovereignty at scale. Its response is therefore not resistance, but selective alignment. Europe aligns publicly where alignment is unavoidable. Security, sanctions signaling, institutional votes. But beneath that surface, it hedges. It rebuilds industrial policy. It diversifies energy inputs. It explores payment resilience. It tolerates gray zone trade through intermediaries. Europe does not exit the system. It reduces vulnerability within it. The Gulf operates under yet another logic. The Gulf is not choosing sides. It is monetizing position. Energy exporters with surplus capital sit at the hinge of the system. They sell to everyone, East and West, while extracting security guarantees, investment inflows, and political flexibility. They price in risk. They trade optionality. They avoid ideological commitment. This is why Gulf states can facilitate rerouted trade without openly opposing U.S. enforcement. They do not need to challenge the system, only to transact within it. Russia and Iran operate further out on the risk curve. Already sanctioned, they push trade deeper into opaque networks. Shadow shipping, jurisdictional arbitrage, intermediaries, and non-aligned hubs. They accept inefficiency in exchange for autonomy. Their strategy is not efficiency. It is survivability. Each actor adapts differently, but the pattern is the same. No one detonates the system. No one exits cleanly. Everyone reroutes. Power circulates through hubs, choke points, and jurisdictions where enforcement thins, not because enforcement disappears, but because it becomes too expensive to apply everywhere at once. This is not chaos. It is reconfiguration. And then there is Africa. As dollar exclusivity weakens, optionality rises. Bargaining power increases. But so does internal competition and external pressure. West Africa sits physically within the U.S. enforcement zone, making it a frontier of sharper contestation. The transition will be volatile. But it also creates opportunity for those who understand the incentives. So where does that leave us? The United States is not simply acting against Venezuela. It is demonstrating a principle. When enforcement becomes expensive globally, power consolidates locally. Energy flows are tightened. Revenue is routed through observable channels. Signals are made loud enough that no names need to be spoken. Rivals respond by hedging, not war. This is not a third world war. It is a reordering. And in an era where systems negotiate region by region, preparation matters more than allegiance.